Tejas, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you here. This is really, really, really good. Like, I have been following what you have done for now. Like, I'm probably a new follower because just for a few months, but what you have done and you show as well your podcast, it's also really impressive. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm Tejas. I tell people it's pronounced like contagious. But it's
Mm.
easier to. It looks strange when you read it, and so if people don't know how to say it. And I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel and Spotify and Zeta and G2I and a bunch of companies. And now a lot of my work is it's sort of research and teaching really. It's research on, so I'm an AI engineer at a company called DataStax, and a lot of my work is researching large language models, AI. How do you apply it? How do you bring real-time context into them? Where do they fall apart? How do you run it locally in a privacy-centric way? So research and then teaching. So the other half is like from all of this research, I naturally discover a lot of things and then take those things to the community and teach them about it. And
Right.
and then
Yeah.
that's of course separate to the podcast, and that's the other thing is I have the Contagious Code podcast. I've been running that now for about 7 months, and it's very hard work, but it's very rewarding work. We have some of the best names in the industry who come on and just like by their own choice will share really great wisdom and thoughts around the way they think and the way they build companies. Right now, we're in the middle of founder and CEO series, and we have tech founders, a lot of them. And the cool thing is, the common thread is that almost all of them, come from an open source background. It's very cool. And so we dive into discussions around how to build companies, how to scale them, etc. And then on Thursdays, so we do it twice a week. And on Thursdays, we hear from actual engineers, like hands-on keyboard building software and what works best for them across a variety of frameworks and stacks and backgrounds. And we have an episode with John McBride, who is an engineer at a company called Open Source. And what they've done is like OpenAI's API was too expensive for them for AI work. And so they just deployed their own AI infrastructure on AWS from scratch. And so we talked through the details of if you wanted to build like ChatGPT infrastructure, what would that take? And it's a really great discussion. So we get to do deep dives on things like this on the podcast as well. So yeah, it's
Right.
AI
Yeah. So
engineering,
you do
50%
quite a
research,
lot
50% teaching
for sure.
professionally
And
for
of course,
40 hours a week.
interviewing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the
Interviewing.
podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. And with the podcast as well, and interviewing really interesting people, you learn also a lot. Like um, because when you can freely speak and ask questions, and especially like you are mentioning, mostly founders, open source, and AI, where you are at the moment, you can grow. I mean, it's really it helps you to grow much quicker, I would say, and also you share. So pay it forward. You share as well with your audience. So that's really cool. So you have like you started programming at the age of 8. Is it right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I had a very I can't say had, I have a very complicated and frankly dangerous disease. And so as a child, I could never go to school or really do anything physical besides type on a keyboard. And so from age 4, I started just playing games and things, and that became very boring very fast. And I thought, okay, what else can I do? And so I started making games and then making websites, and then it went from there. So that started around age 8, and I didn't believe it like later in life when I found out. But I what made me believe it was one, photographs, but also I have a diploma in object oriented C++, and the date on this thing is 2003, when I was 10 years old. And so that's crazy. I can't believe I have this document, but it's signed and stamped and everything. So
Oh wow. Yeah,
yeah.
that sounds crazy indeed. How did you start coding basically? Like was it on a Windows machine or was it on a IBM computer?
Yeah, no, it was we had these like illegal computers where you just buy a bunch of parts and assemble it yourself.
Mm,
So it was not branded, it was not IBM or HP or anything. It was just somebody had put together a motherboard, some disks, some network IO, and like here. And they charged you like less than the big manufacturers, but also like more than the parts. There was like I don't know if it's called the black market, but it was one of those things, and it was Windows 3.1 back then, and there was not much you could do on Windows 3.1
Mm,
at the time. But there was Prince of Persia. That's what started everything. The old school Prince of Persia game. I played a lot of that, and from there was the curiosity of like, how do you make games? How do you even make computers?
I see. So basically, like you started trying to build video games
Yeah,
uh, on that kind of computer. And
correct.
how did you learn? Like you are using, did you say C++ as assembler?
Yeah, no, C++ was an accident. It was at the time my brother, he's 4 years older, and he's healthy, so he could go to school and do physical things. And
Mm,
so he went to a computer class for HTML. And he came back and he taught me everything. He really is the reason I'm a web developer today. So he showed me HTML, and I knew, because I had spent so much time on the computer, I knew the potential of the web platform and HTML at that age, right? I was like, this is going to be big. And so I spent a lot of time, I invested a lot of time in HTML. But after this, my parents wanted to give me my own like education in it, and they didn't know anything about computers really. And so the difference between C++, HTML, they were like, I don't know, it's just some computer thing, go learn it. And so that's why C++. But I don't really have a C++ background. It's just web mostly. And so the games I did make were using a programmer called Game Maker. I think it still exists. And the
mm.
language, it was a custom programming language. It was called GML, Game Maker language. But it was very similar to like JavaScript at the time. So
Oh, yeah. Usually, I mean, this is also a little bit my experience. Like, I found out we like video games, it's a good entertainment. And then we start learning how to code thanks to video games. And then after, if you have an idea, then you continue from there.
exactly.
So, yeah. And then, like, did you knew you wanted to be an engineer, a programmer, or it was just like, as a free time, just for a hobby?
Yeah, there was a lot. I cannot begin to emphasize how much free time there was. There's just so much free time. Again, I was very, very sick. I could not do anything. And if I went, and it was also very deadly. So like if I went to school for
Mm.
one day, I'd have some type of injury, and I would be in the emergency hospital, like in very bad condition for some time, and then after getting the treatment, they would send me home, and I'd have to just stay at home and like recover for a week or more. And so you could say one day of school equals 1 to 2 weeks of time at home, right? Recovering. And so 1 to 2 weeks of time at home, I had parents that both went to work. My brother went to school. I was alone at home for long, very, very long periods of time. Yeah. And so it was a hobby. I didn't think this is going to make me an engineer one day. I was just really just chasing curiosity because there's nothing else I can do anyway. So let me just write some HTML, see what happens. Okay. And then, I start understanding like, how do I do layout? And then I discovered the table element. Okay, we can do table based layout. And then the internet was very young and we had dial up connections back then. So I would actively go online and search about layouts. And I would find that table based layouts are bad. Everybody uses divs. And then I would be like, why? Divs are more difficult. How do you do it? Position absolute. And so it was just like chasing curiosity. I was just really like, how do I do this well? And then later I had enough skill to become an engineer professionally, but it was never the goal. The goal was and is today just to chase curiosity.
I see, yeah. And maybe in a way, thanks to your disease, like what you said, you had so much free time and you had to do something where it wasn't anything like physical. I mean, physically, like
Yes,
you wouldn't do like a sport. I believe if you would play soccer, that would be
I would
really
die.
bad for you. So you had to do something like intellectual, where you could just use a computer and your hands.
Exactly right. Yeah, and
Mm.
so it's the only thing it's almost like the disease chose the path for me, which is very great, right? Because a lot of people, unfortunately, they're at age 18, 19, 21, 25, and they don't know what they want to do with their life. I never had that problem, and I can never relate to people who have this problem because for me, from day one, I was just like, okay, I like computers, I'm going to do this. And there was nothing else I could do. And so in more, I'd say, basic thinking, in more simplistic thinking, a lot of people think, okay, disease, fatal disease, bad.
Mm,
But in my case, it was fatal disease was actually very, very good as well.
I see. And you mentioned your brother, like he liked to learn HTML and coding and programming, but he didn't have that disease.
Yeah, he didn't. And the different, let me correct one thing. He didn't like it. So he did it because my parents made him, and they made him because they thought it would be good to have something extracurricular. But
Mm,
he never really had like a big interest in it. He just thought, okay, this is interesting. He thought it's okay. I'll do it. But the distinction I'm trying to make is when class was over for him, it was over. When
mm,
class was over for me, it was time to really have fun. That's the I think a lot of, like, you even see this in the engineering workforce. There's people who they're software engineers, but they just do the job and go home, and that's it. And this is fine. Like, it's I think that's there's no judgment there. It's a job. But for other people, they do the job, and then on the weekend they do side projects, and they're buying domains, and they're really chasing their passion, right? And so that's the difference. My brother never really had this, like, I'm going to work on the night, I'm going to work on the weekends, I'm just going to chase this because I love it. But I had that.
I see. Have you like were you mostly self-taught, or did you go to a computer science university degree or
Yeah,
whatever?
no, I could never go to university because of my health condition.
Oh
I
yeah.
just, even in school, in one academic school year, I only attended about 19 days of school, because anything more than that and I would die.
Mm,
So it was no, it's all self taught. I did some courses here and there. Like, my parents sent me to the C++ course, as I mentioned. They also sent me to a graphic design course with Photoshop, but those are just like 3-month courses. They're not degrees or anything like that.
I see. Do you have any recommendation for someone who wants to learn programming or AI mostly, or data science as a self-taught person? Like, in the field, so many people are self-taught. In my case, for instance, I went to the university, but I'm also really self-taught because it's impossible. Like, we always have to continuously learn and learn and learn. But I know some colleagues, they have difficulties to learn by themselves, or they don't have the motivation, like what you said. It's just a job, and so they don't learn, or they don't feel driven by what they do, and I believe it's much harder. So maybe you have some kind of tips.
My tip is that it's a myth. It's a mythical creature. It's a unicorn.
Mm,
Like, choosing to be self-taught for something that doesn't come naturally to you
mm,
is never going to work. It's impossible. And so, like, there's what I'm trying to say is there's people who maybe look at the software engineering salaries for AI, right? And they think, this is great. I want to have the $600,000 a year, whatever it may be. And so I'm going to be self-taught and do it. And if they already don't have the motivation, I
mm,
don't think they can invent the motivation. That's not how it works. At least that's not my experience. Like, for me, I really was obsessed. I was obsessed. And it's not just with programming. I also am obsessed, currently, with health science. And so I spend a lot of time doing things like cold exposure and exercise, and really not just exercise, like go to the gym once and hope for the best, but like fine-tuned exercise to maximize performance. And so I tend to have this personality where if something is interesting to me, I am obsessed. I do not sleep. I do not eat. I just go really hard until I crack the code, so to speak. And the beautiful thing about humanity is everybody has that exact motivation and passion, but for different subjects. Like, one of my good friends, she's a florist. She just loves flowers and plants and preserving their life and arranging them in very beautiful bouquets. Like, she loves this, right? And so, that's her passion, that's her business. Great, good for her. She will never be a software engineer. um,
mm,
but that's her intrinsic thing. And I think that's what the human experience is about, is finding that thing that you love and doing that thing, right? Like, there's these memes on the internet, these like comics, where we we think everyone's the same, and we judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree when it wasn't made for that. And so I
Mm,
think some people are made to be AI engineers, and they know this because they're just like naturally curious. They follow that, and then they become self-taught, not because they force themselves, but because they naturally like follow the curiosity. I think anyone who's trying to force themselves to be self-taught is forcing the wrong thing. Um, and so I don't have advice for it. I guess my general advice would be, if your heart is not in it, that's okay. It's important to find what your heart actually wants, and then be self-taught in that. I think as human beings, we're all self-taught about something, and we all naturally want to learn things. Naturally being the key word, we naturally can be self-taught some things. It's just finding that thing. For me, it was code. For my friend, it's flowers, right? For some people, it's the piano. It doesn't matter. But I think if you find that thing and then devote your entire life to it, you could earn more than an AI engineer salary and be happy about it, be satisfied
mm,
about it. Because the alternative, maybe you force yourself to be self-taught with engineering, AI engineering, and then you get a job and you're earning a big salary, but you're not actually satisfied and fulfilled because you never cared about this in the first place. So if somebody wants to be self-taught and have this just for the money, maybe it's not the right thing. So that's my long-winded way of saying it's not possible. And I feel a fair amount of confidence in saying that because my best friend, we've been friends now more than 20 years, and he's a very talented musician and a mechanical engineer. Mechanical, he works with materials, aluminum and steel and like this. um,
mm,
he wanted to learn coding. He told me, I want to be self-taught. Can you help me? Can you teach me? And I spent years trying to teach him, but his mind just doesn't work that way. It doesn't click. And also he's not interested enough to where he would spend, nights, weekends, time and money to learn, to be self-taught. And he even says it himself, I just can't find the motivation. And so we
mm.
both just learned that it's just not his thing, and that's okay. What is his thing is materials engineering, working with polymers and alloys. And so now he has a great job. He does that. And that's like the industry he's chosen because of it. So I think it's sort of a myth that everyone can and should code. We all like different things, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I completely agree, and that's also like the issue with those kind of boot camps that they do promise a high salary. They would have ads everywhere, and so the wrong people or the people who are not made for that would go there with that really nice promise, and then it's just not for them. Like they don't
Yeah,
understand or they don't really like it. For them, a job is just a 9 to 5 job, and they don't understand why everything involves so fast. And they would
yeah,
just like after even 1 year, they would be like, okay, now it's not for me, and they maybe spent 5K in that
yeah,
boot camp for
yeah.
nothing. Yeah.
I would add though, I think it's not necessary to work nights and weekends and work very hard to be successful in tech, right? Like I think
Mm.
also the more senior you get, you just don't, like, I don't work nights and weekends. I haven't done that in a long time. But I think it's it's more a symptom of a healthy adaptive disease. You know what I mean? Like it's an indicator of your interest that you sometimes feel tempted to work nights and weekends. That's what I'm saying. So you don't have to, but that temptation is there because, oh, I have to solve this problem. It's like it's annoying me. I can't not think about it, right? And for some people, they just don't have that, and that's okay. I
Yeah.
think what boot camps should do is make that clear from day one. Hey, you paid some money to be here, but as being here, you might learn that this is not for you. You might learn that this you just don't like it, and that's okay. And then I don't know, they can maybe give them refunds, maybe not, but they need to address that because I think the narrative right now is that everybody and anybody can and even should learn how to code. And I don't think that's true. Imagine taking this to
Yeah.
literally any other industry, high-paying industry, like saying things like anybody and everybody can and should be a doctor, a lawyer, a chef, an artist, a painter. Like, no, we're all different. We all have different passions, and that's what makes humanity awesome. That's what makes us like complement each other, as opposed to all being the same.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And again, like what you said, you don't have to be forced to, but you will know if you are so obsessed or
Yes.
even like addicted because you want to, not because you have to. And if you want to and you love solving problems, then you are definitely in the right
Yeah,
path.
I love your use of the word addicted here, because that exactly is what it is. Like you have like an emotional and a biochemical response to this stuff. Like when even now, like I'm getting animated because I'm thinking about the work, the code, and my brain and body starts to produce a little bit of adrenaline and dopamine. I'm like, oh, let's go do it, right? And some people don't have that for code, but they do get that for cooking. They're like, oh, I'm going to make the best steak and potato. Good, maybe you should be a chef, maybe go to culinary school. Because imagine, I think the greatest thing in life is not just getting a high salary, but getting a high salary for doing something that you enjoy a lot, that you have this strong positive emotional reaction to. That's awesome, because you get a financial reward for work that is also the reward. That's what everybody should aspire to, not just like a high salary but I'm miserable.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why, like software engineer, like I know so many engineers are highly passionate, and it's amazing as well when you surround yourself with other engineers who are also very passionate about what they do, because then you feel even more motivated in what you do. You know, it's contagious. Like the more, like it's also about to who you work with. I found out.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's why I think Silicon Valley is what it is. It's because everybody goes there and they just like feed on each other. It's like this highly synergistic, like growth hacking, I'm going to change the world type of energy. And you don't get that. Like, what do you have in Europe? You have, no, no, we want healthy work life balance and we want to work 40 hours a week and take 5 weeks vacation. That's Europe. And Silicon Valley is vastly different. So I think that's exactly what you mentioned, right? It's like the more people like this you meet, the more productive you want to be.
exactly. Yeah, the environment, it does have a huge impact. Like what you said, in Silicon Valley, for instance, you go anywhere, like in a coffee shop, at Starbucks, even in a fast food restaurant, and you'd see someone on a computer, even more than one person, coding, hacking, or like just building a startup on the computer, and you feel like the vibration, if you see what I mean. Um,
Exactly.
they are driven by what they do, and they don't care about people around them in the cafe. They're just,
Focus.
wired, so focused in the flow. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, when you work in that kind of environment, it's like you're already passionate, and then you are in the amazing, perfect environment. Then you are like time tens. Like you would be boosted by the environment.
Exactly right.
Speaking about environment, and like in my case, myself, I love traveling, and I have been working in quite a few countries. I think you have been, you worked, yeah, like your first experience, your few first companies was in Qatar, in Doha.
That's right.
Yeah, the capital city. How, like now you are in Germany, what kind of work culture, like how is it? I've never been to Qatar, I mean, just a stopover. So I really wonder, like I love working, like I've been working in companies in five different countries. So I know like different kind of work cultures, and I know in every country it's not the same, even though like tech companies usually they tend to be more or less the same kind of work culture, but in other countries it's not the case. And I believe in the height might not be the case. So how was it for you? Did you like it, or it was different, like how the environment was?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's worth noting that I lived in Qatar from the age of 4 to 23, 19 years, almost 20 years.
Mm,
And a lot happens between the age of 4 and 23, right? Like you go through kindergarten, you go to school, you become a teenager, you have your first girlfriend. Like it's like 4 to 23 is like a crazy age range.
mm,
And so I only worked for about, I'd say, 2 years in Qatar. I can tell you that I didn't work at a tech company per se. It was a design agency. So they did like brand design and mostly print. And they decided, hey, the digital world is taking over, right? Like everything's digital now. There's websites and apps, and so they needed a digital team. And so I joined the digital team, and I would help them with branding and marketing, but from a digital perspective. So like creating like apps that are really just like e-brochures, or creating like promotional games for some larger branding project they were doing, things like this, and websites, of course. And so it was actually very nice and very comfortable. I had a really great team. I worked with some really talented people. My boss was German, and her boss was British. So it was very, very great. It was absolutely nowhere near the Western world in terms of deploying and building software. Now, keep in mind, the internet was pretty young, but it wasn't that young. Like we were using in this sort of industry standard in the status quo. The Western world was using things like containerization, or at least virtual machines. And to deploy websites, it was you deploy at least something to S3 on Amazon Web Services or something like that, or at least you have your own server and you SSH into the machine, etc. In Qatar, it was we get a shared server, and we over FTP using like FileZilla or Transit or some client, just like drag our assets from the local machine to the FTP. This agency didn't even use Git; they didn't even know what Git was, and so it was just a consequence of the time. And so I introduced all of this to them, and they were very impressed. And then I ended up becoming like the digital lead and stuff because I just had the most like knowledge, but the bar was very low. Um, I think also Qatar, in terms of a place to work, is tricky because of visa laws. But this is true everywhere. Like I see that you've worked in Australia and I'm assuming you're French, and so you've got to work with the Australian foreign system and be a foreigner, and you're dependent on a work visa, etc. It's the same in Qatar. So if you lose your job, you lose your visa. The only difference in Qatar is they don't allow anyone to retire there, like ever. So you could work there 25, 30, 40 years. But when you turn 60 or whatever the age of retirement is, you've got to leave. You can't stay there. Um,
You can't be citizen. Like they will never give the citizenship.
Correct. Unless I think there's some conditions. I think if you're perhaps Muslim and maybe like a professional soccer player or something, there's exceptions,
Mhm. Yeah.
but by and large, they don't give away citizenship. And I think it's with potentially good reason, right? Because they are so right now, as it stands,
Mhm.
or at least when I left, the population of the country was 10% natural born Qataris, 10%. And 90% was foreigners from everywhere: the United States, India, Nepal, Germany, France, Australia, like everywhere. And so it's they're almost losing their cultural heritage, identity, and claim to the land, right? So much so, a lot of people don't know this. I don't speak Arabic. I never had to learn the national language of this country is Arabic. I never had to even learn the language because everyone speaks English. Everything is in English. The street signs are English with Arabic subtitles, right? And so
Mm.
there's a lot of literature on written by like colonizers on how to take over a country. It's a very interesting read. And step one is usually remove the language, and then society will just break down naturally from there, and then you can take over. And in Qatar, their languages, they don't even use it that much, right? And so I think I can see why they would want to protect their citizenship for that reason. And so it's complicated, it's nuanced. I'm not really a geopolitician, but I can see the reasons why they would do that.
I see. That's really nice experience you had. Like it's amazing. Like you knew before having your first job. Normally, you would use Git. I mean, versioning system. You would use not like FileZilla or like an FTP
Yeah.
client, but you would use something more robust. So you knew that already because you learned by yourself, and
Yeah,
you.
I didn't know about the FileZilla thing. I'll be honest.
Mhm.
That I learned much later. But about Git, I so one thing, and this is maybe something very important for the listeners. One piece of advice that I would give to everybody, and I always do give to everybody, is to always be applying for and interviewing for new jobs. Always, like even if you're happy at your current job, and it's not necessarily because you want to leave. I think it's great to stay at a company a long time. I intend to stay at my current company, DataStax, a long time. But there's so much value in just like reading a job description and then applying and then going and doing those interviews, because you very quickly learn, okay, what do they want, and do I know it, and where do I fail? And once you learn that, you can go invest in those skills, right? So for me, I would read a lot of job descriptions at the time and go like, everybody wants Git. Why? What is
Mm.
Git? What? And I used to use GitHub without knowing Git. And so what is GitHub? And so GitHub at the time had a really awesome interactive Git course. They embedded a shell in the website, and you type. They're like, okay, now type Git init, enter. And so they taught you step by step. And I thought this is cool. So I learned Git because I knew people wanted it. I didn't know why, but once I learned it and I understood the value of versioning, I said, "Whoa, this is really great." And then I started working at this agency where they had like Adobe Illustrator documents, and they had like a folder with literally like 100 documents, and the document names are like, logo V1, logo V2, logo V50. And I was like, guys, you could put this
Right.
in a Git repo,
It was the
and
way
just,
to, yeah.
yeah, just have one file in different branches as opposed to 50 files in a big folder. And for them this was like revolutionary, right? And so I learned the tool because I saw people were talking about it. It was in demand, and then I immediately found like places I could apply it. And that's really not that different than what I do today. Today as an AI engineer, I see techniques like RAG, fine tuning, transfer learning, like all of this stuff. I notice when people are talking about things, and I'm like, okay, people are talking about this. What is it? And I go learn it in depth, very, very in depth. And sometimes I'll get world experts to talk about it in depth with me on my podcast. So I deeply understand it, and my audience deeply understands it. And then, the really powerful thing about knowledge is once you acquire knowledge, once you know something, immediately you see the world differently, and you can identify places where you can apply that knowledge. Kind of like Git. I didn't know Git, but I learned Git, and then I saw immediately how I could use it in my work. I think it's the same for a lot of the things we're seeing today with AI, with Tailwind CSS, with whatever. Like once you learn it, you could be like, oh wait, I could use it for this, I could use it for that, I could solve all these problems. So yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. Again, like it's an investment. Everything you would learn, and no matter the way you would learn, like for you, Git, it was like job descriptions, what the standards are using, like what other companies, or maybe it was in the States. And so you knew, oh, they're using this, or Git, RabbitMQ, why not, or something like this. And the same, like the new tool you would use, it could be machine learning, it could be fine tuning, or whatsoever, it will be an investment for later. So the time you'd spend to understand it will be beneficial for you because you
Yeah.
can use it right away. And this is also the beauty of our job.
Yeah, exactly. Like one example I can give you, and there's no knowledge that you can gain that's useless. I think in our industry, for example, like I spent months studying statistics and Markov chains because I thought this will help me get better at AI engineering. Spoiler alert, it won't. But I spent literally months studying this Markov chains, and I implemented many, many, many Markov chains. And I don't do them. I don't implement any today, but that knowledge has helped me in so many ways, particularly teaching AI to people, explaining to them this is what it is, this is why it's important, and drawing lines in people's minds. And so that knowledge is helpful, and it has application in teaching. So all that to say, I think there's really no knowledge that is ever wasted. And so, like I like the way you put it, Pierre. You say it's an investment. Indeed, everything you learn is an investment, and there's always a return.
That's beautiful, Tejas. And then Qatar, you did your first job there, mostly graphic design and coding, and then you landed in Germany. How was it? Like, I haven't worked in Germany. Are everybody speaking English? I don't think so. Like, it's probably not like Qatar, I believe.
Definitely. I
Um,
was very shocked actually. I thought every place where I was a foreigner would be like Qatar because that's my data set. And so I came to Germany and I heard people speaking German, and it was the main language. It wasn't like English with German subtitles like I expected. And I was like, "What? What is this? Why don't they speak English? Why doesn't everyone speak it?" And I started panicking. And I was like, "Does this mean I have to learn German? What? I didn't have to learn Arabic." It was indeed. It was very strange.
and for your work contract, I know like in Berlin, there are so many tech companies and so many foreigners too. Is it usually in English out of curiosity or is it in German?
Yeah, it's mostly in English because they need the foreigners. There's no one here, or at least when I came, they were desperately in need of software engineers. Now they overcorrected, right? So now there's way too many software engineers,
Hmm.
and not enough. For example, there's not enough doctors to treat the software engineers because there's so many of them. There's not enough tax consultants. There's a lot of people who have been here, who have been software engineers, foreigners, who now are permanent residents. And when you're a permanent resident, you don't need a work visa. You could just be self-employed. You can be a contractor. And there's a lot of self-employed people who don't know how to navigate the tax system, and so now there's not enough tax consultants. And so it's very interesting, the dynamics. But yes, to answer your question, mostly foreigners, mostly English speaking.
Amazing. And so there you became also a lead engineer. So I'm quite interested actually about, like, I've seen you have worked for Spotify and for different really big companies as well, Vercel. Um, like, let's speak about Spotify. Like, I think because in my case I'm really interested into scaling, and I know scaling is also a huge part of our job. It's not just solving problems. I mean, of course, scaling is a way to solve the problem we have. But was it, I think you didn't really work on the Spotify product, but it was Backstage, was it?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, Backstage is it's sort of like GitHub,
Mm,
but for your infrastructure and architectures in your company. So Spotify has thousands and thousands of microservices, like so many services. And like any tech company, the services have very strange names, right? They've got names like Superman and Helios and Zeus and whatever, right? And
mm,
so there's oftentimes in a company. So when I was at Spotify, there were 5,000 employees. Now it's close to 10,000. It's very large.
wow.
And and if you imagine just like four microservices per employee, just an enormous number, right? And so it's very easy to get lost in things. And then when, for example, when somebody's trying to hit play on a song, but there's an error, you have no idea like what service is causing this. And so we need Backstage to just make the discoverability and observability of every service very clear. So in GitHub, how you can discover code, you've got organizations and repos, right?
Mm,
In Backstage is very similar. You have an organization, Spotify, and you have like the equivalent of a repo is a service. And you can just like in GitHub, you can search repos, you can search services, and Backstage you can um, find trending ones. And when you click on a service, like when you click on a repo in GitHub, and in GitHub you can see the code and the description and the meta tags and all of this. In Backstage, if you click on a service, you can see important information about it. Which team owns the service? What is the code of the service? What is the documentation of the service? What is it actually running right now? What were the last 10 logs? What is the P99 performance of it? Like, so just everything. It's a big dashboard for services. Spotify is open source. Companies, I think large companies, I think Netflix was using Backstage. I think the as this may be out of date, but when I was working there, there was rumors that the United Kingdom's revenue service that was using Backstage. So, like a lot of folks are using Backstage. It's a very big deal. So I worked on that. I was part of the team. The nice thing about Spotify is that there are no specialized software engineers. There's no like front end engineers and back end engineers. There's just like engineer one, engineer two, senior staff, principal. But it's just if you're an engineer, you're a generalist. Like you're an engineer for everything. And so, yeah, it was an interesting project. Also, Backstage was a, you can imagine it was a very high priority service. Some would call it a tier one service, meaning if it goes down, the company just stops making money,
mm,
because it's your gateway to all the other services, you know? And so it was very important to be available all the time and to handle the load of the entire company concurrently all the time. So that's, at the time it was 5,000, 5,000 people, but across many devices, right? Because it's not just one laptop per user. Oftentimes it's multiple devices. It's also CDN, like build systems. So if you like deploy a service, then through webhooks, that's going to communicate with Backstage and say, okay, I'm running now. So it has to handle a good amount of load, and it has to have regional failover, meaning if US East is down, it should be able to still work because it serves you traffic from EU West instead as a fallback. So all of that complexity was sort of the scale complexity of Backstage that we had to solve.
mm. So yeah, that was like the way, not really scaling, but kind of because, of course, of the amount of traffic. Was it also? and the amount of deployments, I believe.
Yeah, it was the amount of deployments and the amount of load of traffic. I mean, it's everyone internal at Spotify using it, but also all the machines that automate deployments using it. For example, every time somebody hits a play button in the world, that information goes to a service that then needs to update its state in Backstage. And Spotify has literally billions of listeners, right? So all of this needs to happen in a very concurrent way. And then Backstage would then report the status to us, and so the networking of it all had to be very, very robust. It's, I think, the most important thing for a service like Backstage, which is really base infrastructure for a lot of Spotify, is reliability more than performance. It just has to always be available, and it has to, if there's some outage, it has to come back. Backstage can't be down, because if it's down, engineers just don't know what's happening.
Yeah,
Like, and you lose all your observability. Now we did have some Grafana dashboards and stuff outside of Backstage as well, but it's like you don't know the status of any service. Like it's very difficult to discover the organization without Backstage. So
yeah, like everything is in a black box. You have no idea if
exactly.
one microservice is down or yeah. That's really interesting. Like Spotify is using their own custom, service built. I believe it's because it's the best way for them. As they're
Well,
so
there
huge.
was there was nothing there was nothing before Backstage. There's no platform for observing the status of your services at scale in a company. Nothing. And so
Mm.
that's actually how Backstage came to be, but also how Backstage became open source. So Backstage was internal for a very long time. There was a Spotify presentation, I think it was at Google I/O, where it was about something entirely different, unrelated to Backstage, but one of the people accidentally showed Backstage. And after the talk, people were more interested in Backstage than the actual topic of the talk. And so they were asking a lot of questions about Backstage. What is that? How do we get that? To the point where Spotify was thinking, okay, maybe we should open source this.
That's really interesting. And initially, I thought Spotify acquired Backstage.io, but it seems that they built it from scratch.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
years ago. It's very, very old technology, but it's only recently open source because of public demand.
Hmm. I see. And like, I'm really interested about Spotify and Vercel as well. Were you usually working from home? Because in my case, like usually what I do is hybrid, and I know that engineers usually they tend to prefer working from home. Working in the office can be really good too, especially again for the environment, for the motivation, for the vibes, all of this. But we tend to be way more productive at home. Um, in big companies like Spotify, I believe also are more maybe work from home friendly. But for Spotify, like, do you have any recommendation for someone who is working from home, or maybe productivity, or so it might be hard, or maybe everybody is working usually in the office?
Yeah, with Spotify, I got lucky. So you're right. I prefer working from home also,
Yeah.
mainly because I like doing multiple things in my day. I don't like being in one location the entire day, and so for me, it's very important to work in the morning. So I do this every day. Like the morning is for my deepest, most important, focused work, because I work with my, like, the vast majority of my company is in California, and I'm in Germany. So people really start to wake up and come to work at like 3 or 4 p.m. my time. So my morning is great for uninterrupted special work. And so I spend like the morning hours, you could say the entire morning probably, doing deeply focused work, that I know for sure is going to have a high impact. And then around my afternoon, I share that with the team. I'm like, hey, everybody, I did this. What do you think? Give me some feedback. And then after I share it with the team in the afternoon, I leave my house, I go to the gym, I do some exercise, um, and then I come back, I have lunch, and then it's time for part two of the day. And part two of the day is highly collaborative. Like I'm on Slack, I'm talking to people, I'm having meetings because everybody's awake now, you know. And I can do that because I work from home. I can literally get up, leave, go to the gym, sweat, come back like dripping wet, take a shower, go to the sauna, and then continue. Right. Great. You can't do that in an office, at least
Mm.
not without putting off some of your coworkers based on how sweaty you may be. For that reason, I like the flexibility of doing many things in a day as opposed to doing one thing for most of the day. And an office forces you to do that. Some would say, though, in an office, you're not in the building the whole day because you go to lunch with your colleagues. But I tend to not really value lunch more than I value exercise. I would love it. I would work in an office if like going to exercise with your team was part of the daily routine. But
Mm.
that's just not a thing. So I prefer home working from home for that. Now, Vercel is and always has been remote first. They do have an office now in San Francisco, but Spotify has a famous office. I mean, like the office in Sweden is huge. They have a game room, they've got a listening room. It's really awesome. When I was at Spotify, it was in 2021, in the peak of the COVID pandemic, and the offices were closed. The entire company was working from home, and frankly, doing a pretty bad job at it because it was a big shock, right? Like they'd never worked remotely before, so they didn't know how to communicate like asynchronously. They used to literally like tap people on the shoulder, be like, "Come, let's go to a whiteboard together." Can't do that anymore. So the
Wow.
communication was very difficult. For me, I was pretty good at it because I've always worked remote before that. But for a lot of people, it was a struggle. At the time, they were also building the Berlin office. So I'm based in Berlin. They were building the Berlin office was under construction, and they when the lockdowns were relaxed, they moved to a more hybrid model, meaning you can go to the office if you want, like 2 or 3 days a week, or work from home. I left before that became a thing, though, and
Mm.
so from my time at Spotify, it was all fully remote, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I love your routine. I completely agree, and I love like the fact you first in the morning you are in the you know in the deep work in the
Yeah,
flow. You know, no one will bother you on Slack. I mean, bothering you like distracting you on Slack or on you messaging or whatsoever. And then after you are like just collaborating, which is also very important. Maybe code reviews or whatever. And indeed, like context switching for us, it drains our productivity. And every time if we have a request of another colleague, just the context switching is killing us. Regarding Spotify, it's really interesting actually. Like such a big tech company of at that time 5,000 employees, everybody was working in the office on site. That's quite interesting, and
but it
I
wasn't
believe.
it wasn't one office. It was of that 5,000, there was people in the London office and the Stockholm office, and they
Yeah.
had multiple offices across multiple cities. But it was yes, it was an office.
Really, yeah, amazing. So the routine, I completely agree once again, and exercising and not also like if you work from home the whole day, staying at home, that will also be bad for you. Like you
Exactly.
feel, oh, I'm disconnected of the world. So it's important also
Exactly.
to go outside. Yeah, so you have published a book actually this year. That's really amazing because it's not just like self-publishing or here it is. Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
just self-publishing book, but with already. And I
right.
wonder, like, how did it work? Was it a goal for you? And how much time did you spend on it? Because in my case, myself, I love reading information books usually, and then I love also writing and sharing knowledge. And I see you love doing that, and I believe it drives you. So when did you start? How long did it take? And how hard was it to find a publisher? Like,
Yeah, that's a good question. When I was very young, very young, an early career, I used to see a lot of these O'Reilly books, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. What would it take for me to write a book with O'Reilly? And then I learned, I Googled it, I tried a lot, and I learned that you just have to know the right people and go to the right conferences, and then like, or through network, it's really nepotistic. Through networking, usually this happens, or you become a big deal, like you become very famous, and then they hear about you, and then they want to, because you're famous and because you'll probably sell a lot of books, then they'll ask you to write something. And I was like I was like 13 years old, so I was like, okay, well, this is never going to, I'm in Qatar, I'm a kid in Qatar with a disease, like this is never going to happen. And so I just gave up, and then I just continued going about my life doing. So was it a goal? Right, it was a goal when I was a child, and then I realized it's an unrealistic goal. So I gave up on it, and it was not a goal anymore. And then I, many years later, in March of 2020, just before the lockdowns and the pandemic and so on, I went to a meetup, a React meetup here in Berlin called the React Berlin Meetup. And the host was panicking because the weather was bad and the speakers didn't come, or I think one speaker didn't come. And so there was not going to be a talk. But he knew me, and he said, hey, Tejas, you do talks. Can you like come up with something quickly to save the meetup? And I said, okay, I can try. And so I had nothing prepared. And so what I did was, I'm like, okay, guys, we're going to learn React by creating React. And so I wrote a React component, but I didn't import React from React at the top. And so when you try to run this code, it says cannot read property React of undefined, right? Because React is not imported. It's a property on an object that is not defined. And so I was like, guys, look, it's an error, but let's solve it. Let's just define it. So I did const react equals object, and then it said cannot read property create element, and I was like, okay. So then I created a function called create element, and basically over the course of like an hour, we polyfilled React. We just created React, and it worked in the end, even with state and everything. And everybody was like mind blown, and they were very happy. This was recorded. That video went on YouTube, and the video became very popular. It had many views. It's called Deconstructing React. And
Yeah.
I believe that from there, O'Reilly noticed this video and then sent me an email and said, "Hey, can you write a book about React?" And I got this email, and I was like, "Wow, O'Reilly just reached out to me. That's crazy." And I was laughing because it's this thing. It wasn't a goal anymore because I gave up on it. But I
Mm.
was like, wow, this is so cool. I wanted to do it a long time ago. I realized it's impossible, so I gave up. And now they ask me to write a book. So cool. And so they asked me, and of course I said yes, let's do it. And then I did it over the course of 2 years. I worked with their editors. They're really brilliant people. I'm Shira Evans, Amanda Quinn, just really wonderful people. And yeah, we worked on it with them, and we shipped it. And it since shipping, it's been a bestseller. People absolutely love the book. I'm very happy about it. Um, and I'm working on a second book with O'Reilly actually at this time, on AI for full stack web developers. So that'll come out soon as well.
AI for full stack engineer. Wow.
That's right.
Yeah. Like the full stack engineer who want to be more into AI models and so on. Well, so that's an amazing story. Like your dream came true. You didn't have to speak to Orelli. They just contacted you and they
Yeah,
said, oh,
in a completely unexpected way. Yeah.
hmm. And then I said, we would like you to write a React book. This is what you did in 2 years. You said like it took 2 years. Was it like the first few chapters, did you have to update them? Or because this is usually the annoying part of a programming book, they become really quickly outdated because of libraries. Because now locally React doesn't change much. Like it has been version 18 for quite a while, and I'm not sure when the version 19 will be released, maybe late this year. But like, how was it to update the chapters, or did you everything was went smoothly?
Yeah, things did not go smoothly,
Mm.
at all. Um, yeah, React 19 as of September 4th, I believe, is stable. I'm not sure. So just like a few week, like a week or so ago. But I think it definitely was not smooth because when I started the book, React was much younger. I think it was even React 17, and 18 was just being released, and 18 had concurrent features, right? Um, so that was coming up. Thankfully, I had accounted for concurrent features already in the book, but the reason it took long was also because it changed tremendously with server components. I was ready for everything. I was ready for time slicing and render lanes and concurrent rendering and use sync external store. I was okay with all of this, but I was not ready for server components. And I remember I was about to send my publisher an email, hey, it's done. But in October of 2022, Vercel said, hey, guess what? It's time for Next.js 13 with server components. And I was like, oh, what? And it was a big surprise, right? Because server components was alpha, I think, at the time. But in Next.js, it was not. And so that was a big disruption. I said, okay, this is going to take some more time to get server components right. And so we spent a lot of time after that making. And the thing about server components is it was not even like um, stable. The API was not stable, which is not a criticism. That's how we build software. But when you're trying to write a book with the latest stuff, but the
Yeah.
latest stuff is not stable and changing, then it costs a lot of time because you update it and then the unstable API is different, and then you update it again and so on. So that was the most frictionful part, I'd say, was that. And also the tech review process. Like we had to find reviewers and ask them if they wanted to read it. They read it, they reviewed it, but then I updated it and I was like, "Can you review it again?" And it just kept going. But thankfully, at the end, we did it. We had it reviewed also by one of the core team of React, Rick Hanlon, really excellent person, and he had a lot of changes to suggest, and he also corrected my understanding a lot of React. And in the end, we shipped something truly valuable, reviewed even by the team from Meta. So in the end, it worked. It was definitely not smooth.
It can be very complicated, especially when it's amazing. You decided to include, I think it was in Next.js 13, the server components. And yeah, like it's better to have the book you wished you could buy rather than a book where you know that you could have done better. And for the reviewers, how are you able to speak to like the team from Meta and from React? Was it through orally?
Yeah, no, the team from React and Meta have been friends for years. I mean,
Oh,
I first met Dan Abramov in 2017. It was September 29th, 2017, I think. We met at Zeit Day Berlin, and Zeit is what Vercel used to be called back in the day. And I
mm,
speak at a lot of
yeah, I
conferences, and
remember.
these people also speak at a lot of conferences. So it's only inevitable that we meet, and they're very pleasant people, the React core team, but also just developers in general, like like people are just really great. And so if people are great, and science tells us there's an 80% chance that people are really great, so it's good odds. And so you meet them, they're decent, they're very nice, you form a friendship, and they make the offer. They're like, hey, if there's anything I can support you with, like, let me know. And so if I have a book that needs reviewing, at the very least, I'm going to send you a message and ask if you're free to do it. And they oftentimes are. And again, 80% of the time, people are just nice, and so they were willing to help. Ricky, in particular, and he did. Yeah, so it's just meeting people at events. I think that's maybe some advice for the listeners is I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to spend time with other people. And I'm not saying like networking, because I think there's oftentimes like an agenda with networking, like, oh, get this person to be your friend and then you can like manipulate them or use them. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just like meeting other people and being kind to them and just like listening to them. And I think there's always a lot of healthy value there. Indeed, that's how human beings became the apex predator. This is how we like literally took over the world and the food chain, right? Because we did it together. And it's very important to maximize together time with people.
Networking indeed is not the same way. Where I've been to plenty of meetups, and most of the time you don't really build like friendship basically. But when you meet people, colleagues, friends, it's definitely something in the long term. What software do you normally use for podcast?
Riverside.fm
Oh yeah, yeah,
is
Riverside, yeah.
excellent. It's such a blessing. It's a great piece of software. It's, I think, the best platform for recording podcasts.
I remember your tweet on X when you published your book and you're with your book and you looked so happy. And indeed, like sometimes we have like some goals or things we want to accomplish, like bucket list. And I believe as a software engineer, it's also really important to have goals and to know where we want to go. Like, okay, now I want to learn AI or before Web3 or blockchain, but being focused then, okay, now I want to publish a book. I finish it. It might take 2 years, but I will not give up. I want to be more into AI or I want to be more in blockchain or Web3, but every day I learn, I build things, and I ship it. Because I think it's really tempting, and it depends of the type of people to learn something for a week, 2 weeks, or to start writing a book. about what you love, but then after you just give up and you will never finish. And it's extremely important. I see you definitely have this. Like you are so into it, maybe even sometimes you will not sleep, but you will finish it because you just can't wait to have it finished.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting because with the book, I'm not like this, right? A lot of my friends are millionaires because they make courses. Talking about people like Josh Como, Kenzie Dawes, like they make courses, they sell courses, they earn millions and millions of dollars. Like I think they wouldn't mind me saying that. I think it's just well known. I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if I make a course, I make $1 million or more. I could do this. I know this. I just don't make a course because I don't want to, because I don't care about it, and because I just procrastinate. And it's the same with the book. Like I was not determined to write the book. I didn't put in I did put in a lot of effort, but it was not with discipline. I think that's very important to highlight. I had just a really great publisher, and O'Reilly does an awesome, fantastic job of keeping me accountable. They sat with me. They made a plan. They're like, okay, so we have 10 chapters. We Here's what we think should be the delivery schedule of the chapter. So we want you to give us chapter one by this date, chapter two by that date, and then if for whatever reason I was late or something happened, they would notify me. They would send me an email. Hey, are you okay? Like, do you need some more time? Can we help you ship fast? So they were always willing to support me and keep me on schedule. And without them, I would never have published the book. For the same reason, without them, I don't create courses. I'm just really bad at this stuff. So it was not my determination and my discipline. It was my great publisher, like supporting me and keeping me on track. And again, I can't write a book without them. I don't think I will. So
Yeah, like in a way, they were your accountability
support system.
partner. Yeah, accountability partner or supporter. Yeah, it's like an external motivation because
Exactly.
a little bit like a coach. Like in my case, I know I will not go jogging if I don't have a coach waiting for me
Yeah.
at 9 o'clock. It's the same, I
Exactly.
believe.
Exactly that. Yeah.
And I think that's also very interesting. Like sometimes we need a kind of a accountability partner to motivate, like we want to do it, but we don't really feel motivated unless someone is friendly, like, checking on you. How are you? Where are you at? Do you need any help? Something like this. And that does help a lot. And also like
Exactly.
dating colleagues, we do the same geniusly. Like, and I believe in your case too, as a lead engineer, like probably will not have the time to speak about it, but being a manager can be really hard. And being someone we inspire and someone more like a accountability partner, like someone who is there to help, it makes the life of other engineers also truly different.
Exactly.
We quickly spoke about React 19. What are you looking for React 19? The new features. I know it has been like 2 years. They haven't released a major version. So it will be a really exciting time this year.
Yeah, thanks. I'm super happy to answer this. What I'm excited for with React 19, I think React is finally stable. Like it's not volatile, it's not changing all over the place. And we really see that with React 19. There's new controls and supports for forms and optimistic UI. But there's no big sweeping breaking changes, right? And I think that's what I love the most about React 19 is it's so incrementally updatable, that you can take your existing apps and add a little bit of form state, form status tracking, optimistic handles, etc., and it just works. I think this is really awesome, and I would like to see more of this. And the reason it's a breaking change, React 19, is because it affects a very small amount of teams in a small way. And so I think that's really, really awesome. I love the stability of React. And I look forward to also taking advantage of the new React compiler and the linter. So, yeah, I think that's what I'm looking forward to the most.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Tejas. That was amazing. I really loved speaking with you. I love speaking with highly passionate people like you. Thank you so much for your time, Tejas.
Thank you as well. And I wish you a speedy recovery, man.